Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right, following every recommendation, eating carefully, avoiding sugar, listening to medical advice, staying disciplined day after day, and still waking up every morning with high blood sugar that refuses to improve? You wake up tired, your body feels heavy, your mind feels slower than it should, and before you even start the day, you check your fasting glucose and see a number that instantly creates frustration, confusion, and sometimes even a quiet sense of defeat, not because it's slightly elevated, but because it's high enough to make you wonder what else you could possibly change. And that's when the most dangerous thought appears: what else am I supposed to do? If this sounds familiar, you are not failing, and you are not alone. This situation is far more common than most people realize, especially after the age of 45, and it happens to people who genuinely try to do things the right way. Here is the most important thing to understand before you blame yourself again. If your morning blood sugar stays high even when you do everything right, the problem is not effort, not discipline, and not willpower. The problem is timing. It is biology. It is how your body regulates glucose before you wake up. Before we go deeper, if you often wake up tired, struggle with fasting glucose, or keep seeing high blood sugar before breakfast, subscribe to the channel. Everything here is focused on understanding morning blood sugar, because that is where many metabolic problems quietly begin. Most people are taught a very simple and intuitive model of blood sugar control. Eat poorly and blood sugar rises. Eat well and blood sugar improves. During the day, that logic often works reasonably well, which is why people assume it should also apply to the morning. But morning blood sugar follows different rules. Morning blood sugar is not controlled by what you ate yesterday, how clean your meals were, or how disciplined you tried to be. It is controlled by what your body is doing while you sleep, long before you are conscious, long before breakfast exists. That is why so many people repeat the same story. They cut sugar. They stop eating late. They follow their doctor's advice. They clean up their meals, and still wake up with high fasting glucose, low energy, brain fog, and that heavy, unmotivated feeling that shows up the moment they open their eyes. This does not mean those habits are useless. It means they are being applied to the wrong window of time. One of the most damaging beliefs people carry is the idea that trying harder will fix morning blood sugar. So they restrict more, control more, stress more, obsess over food and numbers, and slowly turn discipline into anxiety. Without realizing it, they begin to blame themselves for something that is largely happening outside of conscious control. Morning blood sugar does not respond to effort the same way daytime blood sugar does, because in the morning glucose is regulated primarily by internal systems, not external choices. While you sleep, your body is not resting. It is active, strategic, and highly organized. It is preparing you to wake up. And part of that preparation involves releasing glucose into the bloodstream to make sure your brain and organs have enough energy to function the moment you open your eyes, regardless of how disciplined you were the day before. Your body runs on rhythms, not motivation, not intention, and not willpower. There is a biological clock that tells your body when to release glucose, when to conserve it, and when to store it. That clock becomes especially active in the hours before waking, several hours before your eyes open. Hormones begin to rise quietly and automatically with one primary goal: ensuring enough glucose is available when you wake up. That glucose does not come from breakfast. It comes primarily from your liver. Your liver stores glucose in the form of glycogen and releases small amounts throughout the night to keep your brain and vital organs functioning. This process is normal and healthy. But after the age of 45, subtle changes often occur. The signals that guide glucose into cells become weaker. Cells respond more slowly, and insulin sensitivity declines. As a result, instead of glucose being released and smoothly entering cells to produce energy, it begins to accumulate in the bloodstream. That is when fasting glucose rises. That is when morning blood sugar stays high, even when you do everything right. And this explains one of the most confusing experiences people have: waking up exhausted, despite seeing a high blood sugar number. High morning blood sugar does not mean your body has too much energy. It means energy is trapped in the wrong place. Energy does not come from sugar floating in the blood. Energy comes from sugar inside the cells. When glucose struggles to enter cells efficiently, muscles feel weak, the brain feels slow, focus disappears, motivation drops, and fatigue appears immediately. So you wake up with high fasting glucose and low usable energy at the same time, along with brain fog, irritability, and a strong dependence on coffee just to feel functional. After 45, several changes often happen together. Insulin sensitivity gradually declines, muscle tissue becomes less responsive, liver glucose release becomes more aggressive, hormonal rhythms lose precision, and sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented. None of these changes feel dramatic on their own, but together they completely change how glucose behaves in the morning. That is why people often say they did not have this problem before, that they ate the same way, and that nothing significant changed. The change happened internally, and the morning is where it shows up first. If your morning blood sugar stays high even when you do everything right, your body is not broken. It is following a biological clock you were never taught about. The problem is not effort. It is timing. It is physiology. It is how glucose is handled before you wake up. Once you understand this, one thing becomes clear. Morning blood sugar is not random. Your body sends warning signals before the number ever appears. Fatigue, thirst, mental fog, irritability. And when you learn to recognize those signals, fasting glucose stops feeling like a mystery. What makes morning blood sugar so frustrating is not just the number itself, but the way it makes people feel powerless. You can spend months, sometimes years, trying to do everything right, changing meals, avoiding sugar, listening carefully to advice, and still wake up every morning feeling like your body is working against you. That feeling creates confusion, because it contradicts what people expect. They assume that good behavior should automatically lead to good results, especially when it comes to blood sugar. But morning glucose does not follow a simple reward system. It follows physiology. This is why so many people describe their mornings the same way. They wake up already tired, already foggy, already feeling behind, before the day even begins. That exhaustion is not a lack of motivation. It is a lack of usable energy at the cellular level, happening at the exact moment the body is supposed to transition into activity. During the night, your body operates in a very different mode than during the day. While you are asleep, it prioritizes survival, stability, and preparation. It does not think about weight loss, discipline, or diet rules. It thinks about keeping the brain alive, maintaining blood pressure, and ensuring that energy is available when consciousness returns. As morning approaches, your nervous system slowly shifts gears. Hormones rise, signals intensify, and the liver receives instructions to release glucose into the bloodstream. This is a normal and necessary process. Without it, waking up would feel impossible. The problem arises when this release of glucose becomes exaggerated or poorly coordinated with how well your cells can absorb it. In younger years, the system tends to work smoothly. Glucose is released, insulin responds efficiently, and cells take in what they need. But over time, especially after 45, this coordination begins to weaken. Cells become less responsive. Insulin signaling slows down. The liver becomes more aggressive in its glucose release, often acting as if the body is under threat when it is not. The result is a situation where glucose enters the bloodstream, but struggles to enter the cells where it can actually be used. This mismatch explains why morning blood sugar can be high at the same time that energy feels low. It also explains why people often wake up with a strange combination of symptoms that seem contradictory. High glucose readings paired with fatigue, mental fog, irritability, and a strong urge for stimulation, usually in the form of coffee. Many people assume coffee is the solution, but in reality, coffee often becomes a compensation. It temporarily stimulates the nervous system, masks fatigue, and creates the illusion of energy, without addressing the underlying issue of glucose not reaching cells efficiently. This is why coffee can feel essential rather than optional in the morning. Over time, this pattern reinforces itself. High morning glucose leads to fatigue. Fatigue leads to stress. Stress increases cortisol. Cortisol signals the liver to release even more glucose. And the cycle repeats, often without the person realizing what is actually driving it. This is also why simply trying harder rarely works. Effort-based solutions focus on conscious control, but morning blood sugar is largely shaped by unconscious processes that happen before you wake up. When people try to fix a timing problem with more restriction and more pressure, they often intensify stress signals, which can make the morning pattern worse. That is why many people experience a confusing phase where their habits improve, but their morning numbers do not. From the outside, it looks like failure. From the inside, it feels unfair. But physiologically, it makes sense when timing is ignored. The morning is a unique window. It is the only time of day when blood sugar can be observed without interference from food, movement, or decision-making. That is why fasting glucose is such a powerful signal. It shows how your body behaved overnight, how your hormones communicated, and how well your cells responded to the glucose that was released. This is also why fasting glucose often tells a different story than A1C. A1C is an average. It smooths out peaks and valleys. Morning blood sugar, on the other hand, captures a very specific moment when regulation is most vulnerable. That moment reveals problems earlier than many people expect. When fasting glucose is consistently high, especially alongside fatigue and brain fog, it is not random. It is information. It is your body showing you that glucose handling in the early morning hours needs attention. Understanding this changes the way you interpret your mornings. Instead of seeing them as a personal failure or a sign that you are doing something wrong, you begin to see them as feedback. Feedback about timing, feedback about internal rhythms, feedback about how your metabolism is adapting with age. This shift in perspective is important because it removes shame from the process. Shame leads to stress, and stress directly worsens morning glucose regulation. Clarity, on the other hand, allows you to respond calmly and strategically. When you stop fighting your body and start listening to it, patterns become easier to recognize. You notice that mornings feel harder on certain days. You notice that stress from the night before affects how you wake up. You notice that fatigue, thirst, and mental fog often appear together, long before you ever check a glucose number. These signals are not random. They are early warnings. They appear before numbers spike. And when you learn to recognize them, morning blood sugar stops feeling unpredictable. This is why focusing on the morning is so important. The morning is where multiple systems intersect at once. Hormones, liver activity, nervous system signaling, and cellular energy use. Small imbalances show up there first, before they show up anywhere else. If your morning blood sugar stays high even when you do everything right, your body is not betraying you. It is communicating. It is following internal rules that were never explained to you. The problem is not discipline. It is not effort. It is not willpower. It is timing, physiology, and how glucose is handled before consciousness begins. Once you understand this, the morning stops being the enemy. It becomes the signal. And when you understand the signal, you regain control without fighting yourself. If this explanation helped you make sense of why morning blood sugar behaves the way it does, subscribe to the channel. Every video here is focused on morning blood sugar, fasting glucose, why people wake up tired, and why high blood sugar before breakfast is so common after 45.